I just want to say thank you so much for being here in Reno, Nevada, CannaGrow. This is going to be a very exciting weekend. I'm very excited to be teaching this seminar. This is a very important seminar. It's being brilliant at the basics of home cultivation. I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself. I have been a cultivator for the last decade. I started off in a small basement grow in Hyannis, Massachusetts, and then within a year of moving to California, I was a trimmer, and then I was a bud tender, and then I was the head manager, and then I started out in cultivation, and then I became the cultivation manager. And I like to tell that story just to show everyone that you can start anywhere in this industry, and then if you know what you want to do and where you'd like to see yourself, you can grow toward that, and you can work toward that. This class, I work at the Northeastern Institute of Cannabis on the East Coast, and with this class, it's actually a 4-hour class, but for 12 hours. We do 12 hours or 4 hours of grow room design, 3 hours, 4 hours of prep, 4 hours of veg, 4 hours of flower. So in this 15 minutes, I'm really going to try to condense all of that. So if you guys could actually save your questions to the end, it's going to be great. We're going to be able to talk much more after this. And if you think of anything, try to think of how could I take the information I'm learning here and apply it to my own grow. We're going to talk about a lot of different situations, different spaces that we could grow in. So it's really about taking this information and figure out what's the best way to utilize it and then apply it to yourselves. I'm also with ProMax Grow Lighting, so we're going to be at booth 301. So you can find me here throughout this entire event, and I'm happy to answer any questions. So let's get started. So here I am. This is me right up in the corner back in 2010. That was my small little home grow. And then within the year, the bottom picture is where I worked in the dispensary. And now this is about a year ago over in Maine. So to show you guys, there are different ways to grow, different styles to grow. I like it because one's a small little home grow, then we have another large-scale facility, and then we also have just a basic grow room. So it's about what kind of spaces are you going to be able to using, how large do we want to veg our plants, and just to give you guys an idea that these can come in all shapes and sizes, especially when we talk about growing. So an overview of what we're going to talk about today, we're going to talk about the laws, how to obtain our cannabis safely, how to get our seeds, knowing the difference between an indica and a sativa, a hybrid, a land-raised strain. So when we get started on basic cultivation, there's 2 ways you can go. You can crack a seed or you can get a cutting. We're going to talk about the pros and the cons of each and maybe which one fits best for you. We're going to talk about the importance of a nutrient schedule, how to plan to grow for something called perpetual harvest, meaning that we're going to constantly be growing, we're going to constantly be harvesting. So it's setting up our grow room, setting yourself up for success by learning about grow time, space, and then financial considerations. Because you always want to be a grow ahead of your grow. That's going to be very important. So laws, know your state laws. A great website is procon.org. One of my favorite quotes is, being ignorant of the law does not make you exempt. Remember that cannabis is still federally illegal. It's a Schedule I substance. But what's fantastic is the laws are able to govern themselves, and you might live in a state like Massachusetts, Maine, California, Colorado, where it's recreational now and you can cultivate, or you might live in another state where it's medical and you're growing for those reasons. Both of which you're going to be able to apply from this class with your home cultivation. But with state to state, what's great is that they vary, but they also have different restrictions, different things we need to think about. Some states have height restrictions, others have plant counts, others are going to have square footage restrictions. How much excess cannabis are you allowed to have once you harvest? Can you take that cannabis and donate it, sell it? What does your state allow you to do? So before you even get started cultivating, I really want you to take the time to look into your state laws and make sure that you're following within those guidelines. That's going to be one of the most important things you can do. So, has everyone heard of all these different cannabis names? We have like the Bubba Kush, the Green Crack, the Jilly Bean, the Sour Diesel. So something I want to tell you guys is don't worry too much about the name. Sometimes the name can tell you where it's from, like a land-raised strain. Sometimes the strain will be named after the breeder, like Jack Herer, or it could be named after the company. There's a company called Bog Seeds, and they have Boggle Gum, Boggleberry, Bogs. So whenever I hear that, I know it's them. And then we also, sometimes those strain names are completely arbitrary. But what is really important to find out when we're picking out, do I want to go from a clone or a cutting or a seed, look past the strain name and ask the hard question of, well, what is the cannabinoid profile, or what cannabinoids could I possibly get out of this plant? Is it more indica? Is it more sativa? Is it more of a hybrid? And we're going to go through all that so that way you're able to set yourself up for success to ask those pertinent questions that are going to help you succeed in the grow room. And right over here I have a cannabinoid profile. So I went and I got some medicine tested, and you can see that they're going to vary. So it's like 11% THC for some trim, or if you have a concentrate, it might be 80% THC. Or if you're growing, it might be in the 20s. So getting it tested is really going to be the best way for you to figure out how you're doing as a grower. How have I come along? If I started at 11% and now I'm at 15 and I keep cultivating and then I'm at 20 and then I'm in the high 20s, well, that's great. That's where you want to be. But you don't actually know if you're getting any better if you don't have a point of reference to show your success. So the difference between indica, sativa, hybrids, landrace strains, let's talk about it. Has everybody heard of indica, sativa, hybrids? Are we all a little bit familiar with that? Fantastic. Did you know that every strain of cannabis that you love comes somewhere indigenously on the planet? So some strains actually grow closer to the equator. Some will grow further from the equator. And this is what we need to think about as we go ahead and pick out our strains, because where these strains are from indigenously is actually going to be a pretty big precursor to how they're going to grow in our home. So if I got a plant like an Afghani or an Hindu Valley Kush, and I took it and I put it in my backyard in Massachusetts, and I'm like, get with the program. Do you think it's going to do that? No, it's going to need the conditions that it's used to from where it's from, so it's up to me to understand what is the plant used to, and then how do I go ahead and provide it with that in my growing space. Cannabis is part of the Cannabracea family, which is a small family of flowering plants, including cannabis, hops, and hackberries. So knowing where your strains are from are going to be very important. So we hear things like landrace strains, so the Kush, the Hawaiian, the Afghani, Jamaica, Mexico. So for example, Maui Wowie comes from Hawaii. Afghani comes from Afghanistan. Acapulco Gold comes from Mexico. Durban Poison comes from Africa. So when we start to look into names, or when we start to ask, well, where are these strains from, sometimes you're going to hear maybe hints within the name, but you want to look back and ask, well, where is the lineage of this plant? Where does this plant come from? So sativas. So sativas are geographically found close to the equator, which makes them thinner and taller. For their cannabinoid profile, they tend to be higher in THC. So that's going to give you that uplifting, energized, focused mind effect. What it's going to help treat is depression. It's going to help stimulate that appetite. It's going to be a mood elevator. Usually we'll hear it with our hazes, tend to be sativa dominant. So indicas, our indicas tend to be further away from the equator. So because they're further away from the equator, they're going to grow shorter, they're going to grow bushier. Common cannabinoids are going to be that CBD. So that's going to be great for relaxing, sedative, that full body. It's really going to help people with insomnia, inflammation, reducing anxiety, and we find it a lot within the Kushes. And a hybrid, so I always say when an indica and a sativa love each other very much, they create a hybrid. And so what you're doing here is you're just crossing genetics. You're becoming the breeder. You're playing with the sciences. So if you have two strains that you really love, you could link into pollinating them and then maybe creating a very new strain of your own. And what's great is that we're all going to find that we love different strains, and different strains work best for us. So it's about finding what that is and then just finding a way to get them to work together. So because it's going to be a mix of mom and dad, which is an indica and a sativa, the cannabinoid profile, you're going to need it to get tested. The way it's going to grow is going to be a variable. You don't know, is it going to be a little bit more like mom and a little bit more like dad? So it's going to be important to watch your phenotypes, and we're going to talk about that more as we go along. And then we also have the autoflowers. So the autoflower is found in Russia and Central Asia. It grows very short, has a very low yield. It tends to be very high in CBD. It's going to be great for pain management, anti-convulsion. But here's something about the autoflower, is it doesn't rely on a photoperiod to tell it when to start flowering. Instead, it does it internally. So has anyone ever heard of Russia being known for their citrus? No, because they're not. So this plant, over time, actually developed to the point where it didn't wait on the sun to tell it what to do. It starts to do it internally. So with our autoflowers, they don't grow to be very big. They're very small, and they don't yield very much. They only yield like an ounce and a half, maybe 2 ounces. So those are things you're going to want to think about when you set up your grow room. Which is right for me? Do I want a nice big giant sativa? Do I want a bushy indica? Do I want a hybrid, which is somewhere in the middle? Or would I want a nice little ruderalis? So let's talk about the difference between germinating versus cloning. So this is going to be really important. I want to get started with my grow. Where am I going to start? We got 2 places. So know your genetics. This is going to be so helpful. I can't emphasize this enough. It's going to prepare you for how much space and time you're going to need when you first start germinating. I always recommend practice on cheap seeds, bag seeds that you don't care about. So that way there's no stress when you actually go ahead and buy a seed pack. Seed packs can be expensive, so 5 packs of seed, or 5 little seeds in 1 pack can cost $100, so it's $20 a seed. So I've known a lot of people that this kind of gives them anxiety where I have to grow, I have to cultivate, it has to be good. And when we're first learning something, you know, maybe we're going to make a couple mistakes. So make mistakes on something you don't care about, practice on something you don't care about, and then once you feel confident in germination, that's when I think it's a good idea to go ahead and start purchasing those seeds. There's no wrong way to pop a seed. Has anybody ever tried germination before? Paper towel method, throw it in some water, just throw it in the dirt, it'll work. There's no wrong way to pop a seed. It's just about finding which way is the best way for you. Also, make sure that you get it from a reputable source. I can't emphasize that enough. You want to make sure you go through a breeder. You want to make sure you go through somebody who's back-crossed these genetics. And I'm going to show you guys the importance of that as well. So germinating, something just very important to emphasize is when we see a whole bunch of seeds, sometimes they're different color. Some are paler, some are darker, and they have those brown striations on them. The dark ones with the brown striation, those are the ones you're going to want to look for. Those are what we call viable seeds. Those just have a higher likelihood of germinating. So if you're going to buy a seed pack for $100, it's not uncommon at the booth or when you get them to open it up and be like, hey, may I see that before I walk away with it? So that way I know that, you know, nobody's deformed, nobody's cracked, anything could happen, nothing's premature. Because I want to start off with the best seeds for me right when I go. I want to make sure that these all have the highest likelihood of germinating. So seeds, when we buy seeds, there are 3 different kinds of seeds you can go for. There are just regular seeds, which is when a male pollinates a female, and then you're going to have a whole bunch of seeds. And when you pop them, some are going to be more like mom, some are going to be more like dad, some are going to be male. So regular seeds could be male, they could be female. Then we move into something called feminized seeds. Now feminized seeds have been genetically modified to produce female plants, so it's very discouraged that novice growers use them because feminized seeds have a high rate of what's called hermaphroditing, herming, so they'll become both male and female when stressed out. And a lot of times growers don't want to use them because they've been treated with something like gabrielic acid. And then we also have our ruderalis, also known as the autoflower strains, that doesn't have a photo period and it will always be a female plant. So there are different things you can go. So when you start buying seeds, it's going to be important to ask, are these, you know, just regular seeds? Are these feminized seeds? Are these auto-flowering seeds? Because that's something you're going to want to find out. Setting yourself up for success, especially if we know that those little ruderalis flowers, they don't get much bigger to your knee. And if you were growing and you were like, I want to grow because I want to get 2 pounds off a plant, well then a ruderalis might never be for you. So just setting yourself up for success before you even get started. Do the research on the plants. So some great seed companies to work with. I've been reaching out to a couple companies. I teach a lot of classes in New England, so I was like, I teach these classes. I need to be able to recommend places for my students to go where I know that they're going to get reliable genetics, that if for some reason the genetics didn't find their way to the home or they were cracked or deformed in some way, that these breeders are fantastic and they're going to work with you and then send you a new pack. So how do I go ahead? How do I buy genetics? So I literally just screenshotted this with my phone one day. I went to TGA Genetics. I clicked on Buy Seeds. I looked at all their beautiful strains that they have available to us. And these are a bunch of different names: 9 Power Hammer, Agent Orange, Chernobyl, Cheese Coracle, Dairy Queen, Jilly Bean. What does it all mean? So I'm going to look past those names, and then we're going to go to the next page. So the one I picked on was Doctor Who, because I'm a Whovian and kind of a dork, and it's a fantastic strain. So I was like, what is this Doctor Who? Who is it crossed with? It's crossed with Mad Scientist, crossed with Trainwreck. So now I know its parents. Now I can kind of trace back that lineage. And it's kind of small font, but as you can see, they can actually break it down for you. And it tells you the phenotypes, and it says that there are 4 main phenotypes. And then the height is small to medium. And then this is really important, what a lot of breeders can do. It can give me a projected yield. Some plants, because of the way they're bred, because of the lineage they have, they'll never be heavy yielders. So with that in mind, if you're somebody who's cultivating for the idea of getting a large yield, unless you're going for like those little connoisseur strains, this is a great place for you to look and be like, hey, this says moderate yield. So I might want something that's a heavy yield if I'm going to get started on genetics. And then it also says the best way to grow. It's easy to grow and then chop it, so you can make it into a nice big bush. It harvests within 36 to 63 days. This is really important, and we're going to touch upon it again. So harvest time. I've known a lot of growers and a lot of new growers that they hear that the plant harvested on the 56th day, or the 65th day. So they're going to pull it on that day. Do not pull it by the day. Always pull it by the trichomes. And as we go on through the slides, I'm actually going to show you the maturity of those trichomes, because that's what you're going to look for. The day is just an idea of, hey, this could take X amount of time, but what's really going to be important is looking at that trichome formation and making sure that they're that amber that you're looking for. And then it says with this, it usually tends to be sativa indica, so it's a 60-40 ratio. It's a hybrid, and then it can also tell you the aroma, which is that it's very fruity. So that's fantastic when you're working with breeders and genetics that can actually tell you, because they've been breeding and because they've been back crossing these genetics so long, you're apt to get these 4 phenotypes. And of these 4 phenotypes, they're probably moderate yielders. So I'm really loving that, especially because I could be cultivating for myself, but then also I work with large-scale facilities. So I need to make sure that when I'm growing, that I have enough to keep up with the supply, and that I also have enough variation of strains to keep my clients happy. So those are things you're going to want to think about. So growing from seeds, so what you're going to do is you're going to grow it, you're going to veg it, and let's say you have a pack of 5 seeds, so those are all going to be your moms. You're going to take a cutting off of each of them, and you're going to label them C1 of P1, so the first cutting of the first phenotype. You're going to grow it up to whatever size you want. We're going to talk about this too. You could have a plant that you let veg, and you could keep it in a 3-gallon pot, or you could have it in a 7-gallon pot, or you could have it in a 20-gallon pot, or you could have it in a 65-gallon pot. It's really about how long you want to let it veg for, how big you want to let it get. That's going to be all up to you. And during this time, you're going to go ahead and you're going to flower out those clones, and you're going to be able to tell whether or not they're a male or a female, and then you're going to get rid of the males and you're going to keep the females. So it's just genetics. It's just the idea. Has everyone heard of like Putnam Square, that brown eyes and blue eyes? Some people are going to be more like mom, some people are going to be more like dad. So if you had a strain like Bubba Kush and you crossed it with the Super Lemon Haze being very sativa dominant, Bubba Kush being very indica dominant, you're going to get a beautiful hybrid. So you could call it, you know, Bubba Haze or Super Lemon Kush, something like that, because some are going to be more like mom and then some are going to be more like dad. So it's about asking, hey, what is that phenotype? Does that have more of that haze to it, or does that have more of that Bubba Kush to it? Those are the questions that you're going to want to ask. And then right here, I love this picture. This is a great picture. So on our right, we can see the beginnings of a female plant starting to show. We can see those calyxes, that pistil formation. We know that's going to grow into a nice, beautiful bud. And then we can see over on our left, we can see those pollen sacs. So that's the precursor for a male. And that's really important. You want to be ever vigilant, especially if you're growing from seed, because you don't know if it's a male or a female. You want to pull those males out of that room unless you're breeding as soon as possible and get them out of there, because if not, they're going to pollinate, and then they're going to pollinate all of your plants. And if you're growing in a facility, that could be devastating, because now all of your flowering seeds, all of your flowers are now going to have seeds in them. One time I had a friend who was growing in her room, and she was doing this, and she had some jelly bean seeds, and one of them was a male, and she didn't know, poof, pollinated the entire room. But she loved jelly bean, so she was so happy, because now she's like, I have this cross with jelly bean, I have that cross with jelly bean. She's so excited just to pop all these new seeds and see what it is she gets. So for her, it was like a happy accident, and maybe kind of the same, but for a lot of us, that's something that we really always want to steer clear from. And then the one right in the middle, that's just showing you that that's very early on, but we want to look at the nodes, which as you can see is right in the middle. It's already starting to pre-flower just a little bit and show us that single pistil, letting us know, hey, I'm a female. So once we know whether or not we have a male or whether or not we have a female, this is when we're going to get rid of our males, we're going to keep our females, and we're going to turn them into our mothering plants. A mother plant is just a plant that stays in an eternal state of veg so that we can continuously take cuttings off of it. So taking cuttings, has anybody ever done this before? It's very easy. It's a wonderful thing to do. So when you're taking cuttings, if it's not from a trusted source, don't take them. You can compromise your entire garden. A word from the wise, don't put new clones into the garden before they've been quarantined for at least 2 weeks. This way you can make sure they're free of mold, mites, mildew. And then if I had a nickel for every time I heard a story of, oh, I got this strain and I thought it was this and it wasn't that, or it gave me mites, or it actually wasn't a female, it was a male and I didn't know it until I'd already spent 9 months vegging it and I threw it out, and then within a couple weeks I was like, that's a boy. But now I've already wasted 9 months on this plant, and that usually happens because you didn't get it from a reliable source. So just be careful, take a really close look, and then again, emphasizing that, know where you're getting your genetics from. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna take a cutting, we'll cut off one of those side shoots, those branches, and then we'll strip them from the bottom. You're gonna get your everything you need ready, and then this is kind of something where, remember I talked about our financial things we want to be prepared for. You're gonna need fiskars, you're gonna need a rooting agent, you're gonna want to get sponges or rock wool or your hydroponic setup, whatever it is you want to use. This isn't me telling you you have to grow this way, this is the best way to do it. That's why when you walk into a hydroponic store, there are all these different kinds of things and there are all these different kinds of ways to grow. It's just figuring out which way is the best way for you. So I'm going to take my cutting. I have a heating mat, I have my sponges, I have my cloning solution, and then I'm just going to cut it at a 45-degree angle. And then as you guys can see, it's at that 45-degree angle. And then I'm going to take my fiskars and then I'm just going to score it on the other side. And you can almost see on the fiskar, there's just like a tiny little piece of plant material, because I'm not gashing into the side of the plant, it's just a tiny nick, so that way the root structure is able to grow out from every side. Grow evenly, grow healthy. It's very important. And then I'm just going to dip it in my rooting solution. Then I'm going to dip, I like to use sponges, so I put it into my sponge, and then I go ahead and I put it into my cloning machine. So you're going to want to think about, well, how do I want to use this? Do I want to use a cloning machine? My friends and I made one. We just grabbed, a pump, some air stones, and we made a makeshift one that works really great. You can buy one. You can also just get a tray, put the sponges in there, put that on a heating mat underneath the light, and they'll root. I've also had friends who have just taken cuttings, put them in a glass jar on the windowsill on a hot day. It's not the best way to do it, but it's a plant and it works. So it's really just figuring out, what do you want to do, how do you want to grow? And then you're going to see eventually that this cutting that you took is now starting to form this nice, healthy, beautiful root structure. And during that time, well, that's when we're going to want to think about, should I transplant this plant? What size do I want to transplant this plant? And right now is when we're really going to get into that veg and that flower cycle. So I want you guys to think about, before you get started, how much space do I have to give you? How many rooms can I donate? How many tents do I have? Those are going to be important, because if we just start, with every single plant that we have when we start cultivating, we need to think about that these plants are going to grow exponentially within these next few months, and we want to account for that by having the right room size available to us. So let's talk about that. So when we're talking about grow, now that we have a really firm grasp of, I can go from a seed, and I get it, I'm playing with genetics, males, females, awesome. I take a cutting, I know exactly what I'm getting, it's going to be an exact replica of mom. So now I get to start thinking a little bit about my grow room. So plan your grow to be ahead of a harvest. So that's what I always want to do. I do perpetual harvest. So plan your grow with the life of the plant in mind. Also keep in mind the state laws are going to be really important. Variables are going to be things like, what pot size you want to use, what your plant count is, what medium you like to use, and another expense or something you want to think about before you get started. Am I growing in a tent or am I growing in a room? Am I growing in my attic? Am I growing in my basement? Also, I live in Boston, Massachusetts. You know what's great about New England? We get all four seasons prominently. You know what's annoying about New England? We get all 4 seasons prominently. So when I start cultivating in my basement in January, February, March, April, May, June, I got no problems. July, August, September. Do you know what just hit? The humidity. So now I need a dehumidifier in there, and it's not a very conducive environment for me to have flowering plants. So it wasn't a problem during part of the year, but then it's going to be a bigger problem during the summer months. And that could vary just depending on what state you're in. So it's important to, just keep those things in mind. Remember that heat rises, so if you're growing in your attic, it might be nice in the perfect condition during the winter, but then it's going to be a lot harder to keep the temperature where you need it to be during the summer. So just keep those things in mind. So for equipment, I am a warranty kind of gal. I want to make sure that my equipment's going to last because it's going to be expensive and I'm going to be growing for the rest of my life. So I want to make sure that my equipment is reliable. So I always say, does it have a warranty and does it have reliability? Those are the things I want you guys to ask. This is a really great convention because you have all these different booths here. So you're going to be able to go, so what is it about your nutrients? So what is it about your lights? So what is it about your grow equipment that kind of sets you apart? And you're going to be able to ask and then figure out, well, what will be the best equipment that you like, and then what is the best for your setup. Another thing is that physical structure. So again, am I going with a grow room or am I going with a tent? Nutrients, do I want to buy my nutrients or do I want to create my own nutrients, as in like make a compost? Other things, light fixture, light bulbs, ballast, wattage. With water, you got to think about hoses, a pH pen, a ppm meter. You're going to want to think about air. You're going to want to think about fans, CO2, ducting, hygrometer. You're going to want to be able to know the temperature and the humidity in your grow room at all times. Another thing, you're going to need those carbon filters. You might not need them so much for veg, but then as the flower time comes, you do not want to be the best smelling house on the block. You just want to know that you're the best smelling house on the block. So the Veg Cycle, so literally it's so easy. All we're trying to do is creating conditions. We're just tricking the plant. We're so clever. We're just creating the outdoors, indoors, and we're just replicating that April to May. So the plant can stay in an eternal state of veg for decades. You want that light cycle to be 18 hours of light, 6 hours of dark, or 24 hours of light. The spectrum for the light, we want it to be blue because that's what he's going to see naturally outside. Questions on energy. This is going to be a huge variable, and this is going to be something you really want to think about with our wattage. Do I want to use a 400, a 600, a 1000? Do I want to use LEDs? Do I want to use T5s? What makes the most sense for me, especially like what is the square footage of my facility? That's also going to be really important. And do I want to create an entirely new room so that I have a perpetual harvest? I have one room that just has my vegging plants. I have another room that just has my flowering plants. And you want to create that room with space in mind, airflow in mind, plant spacing in mind, water, air filtration. All of the above is going to be very important. So now we're going to flip over to the flower. And again, all you're doing is creating the outdoors, indoors. You're going to replicate that August to November. So the plant's going to be ready when the plant is going to be ready, and it could take 2 months, it could take 4 months, and you do not pull by the days, please pull by the trichomes. You really want to make sure you get that optimal medicine for you. And then you want to give the plant more of that red spectrum. Again, we're not going to be using the same lights, so do we want to have a 400, a 600, a 1000? All these things you're going to want to think about. We're going to need completely new nutrients, and I'm going to talk about that as well, but that's just a cost and something that you just want to be mindful of, is you're not giving it the exact same nutrients in its entire life cycle. You have to buy new nutrients, or you're going to have a different compost for it, things to think about. Do I want to create a completely new room, a new space, so I have that veg room, I have that flower room, and the same things to keep in mind: airflow, space, watering, and the smell. The smell is going to be, you're going to smell awesome, but you want to be mindful of it. Now trimming, so the trimming and the curing process. So this is something else that's going to happen during our cultivation time. We're here, we're ready, we put in all this work, I figured out my perfect genetics, I created this fantastic veg space, I created this beautiful flowering space, and now it's time to really enjoy the fruits of my labor. So do you need a space to trim and to cure? Think about it. Am I doing it within that flowering room, or do I need an entirely separate space so that way my trimmers can sit in there, and that I also have a room that is able to hold all that medicine with the temperature and the humidity of what that medicine needs in mind for that perfect cure? Do I want to trim wet, which means that I pull it right off the plant and I start trimming it? Do I want to let it dry when you hang it upside down? Something that I've worked with a lot of different trimmers before, and the best piece of advice I've found, because I've watched some people trim, and it's been almost nothing short of painful, because like, You know, they're really just trying to figure it out. But I'm like, if you listen to good music, and I mean like rap, rock, anything you like, in 4, like 1, 2, 3, 4, anything you can like tap your foot to with the beat. Everywhere you tap your foot, click your scissors. So I always say listen to music in 4. So 1, 2, 3, 4. On the 2 and the 4, just listen to music, just trimming, just keeping it going, and that's how I'm getting fast, and you fall into the groove of the music. Because if not, I've seen people sit there for a substantial amount of time just trying to figure it out. So those of us that know, and then those of us that don't know, you're welcome in advance. It's a really fun thing to do. Hang out with your buddies, trim some cannabis. If you are trimming dry though, before you go ahead and you stick it into the jars, you want to make sure that the stick snaps. That way you know all the water from the bud has leached out into the stick and is no longer there. So you're going to be able to put it into your jars, and you're going to let it cure for a month or more. So did you guys hear you're going to let it cure for a month or more? Because this is a big point where a lot of people make that mistake of, I'm ready to smoke it. Wait, give it that month to cure, give it that month to ferment, to mature, and you're going to have the best quality medicine. A lot of people try to rush this process, but you can't. Just enjoy it and just account for the fact that you're going to need to add that extra month on before it is you can sell that medicine, or before it is that you can smoke that medicine. Also, what you're going to want to do during that curing process is keep the cannabis out of direct sunlight, keep it in a dark and cool spot. Other financial considerations, so you're going to need fiskars, you're going to need liquid to clean your fiskars, you're going to need drying racks, you're going to need glass jars. Are you your own trimmer? Are you paying for trimmers? Are you using a trimming machine? See, so things you got to think about, because you don't want these small things to kind of pop up on you. And then right here, and if anybody wants, I can take a card, you can give me your email, and I'll just send you guys this with all the different temperatures and humidities. And then really what I like to get out of this slide is just to show you that for each phase of the plant's life, it needs a different temperature, it needs a different humidity, it needs a different spectrum. So we got germinating, we have cloning, we have veg, we have flower, we have curing. And please note that all the temperatures and humidities will vary depending on the strain. Some like it hot, some like it cold. Where is this plant indigenous to? Those are going to be the big questions you're going to want to ask. But let me tell you what, with every cannabis plant, the secret ingredient is love. You have to love your plant. You have to love going into that garden every day, getting to know your plants, getting to know your different phenotypes. Hey, how are you doing? What is it that you like? How are you different from mom? How are you different from dad? And just, enjoying them for their individuality. So the importance of a schedule. So a schedule is going to be crucial for setting yourself up for success, for keeping yourself on track. So am I watering? Am I feeding? Am I trimming? Am I chopping? Am I stripping? What am I doing this day to this plant? You don't want to walk into the grow room and have no idea. And especially if you have 2 veg rooms or 2 flower rooms or all of this going on, it becomes, it grows as you grow. So being able to have a detailed schedule of what needs to be done in the months to come. I work at a grow facility, and at that facility I set up every single grow room a month before. So that feed, water, rest, today we're going to be stripping, today we're going to be topping. I know when it's going to be done a month in advance. And this is great because I know what are my light days and I know what are my heavy days. I know what days I have to hire on more employees, and I know what days that I'm not making any plans. So those are things that you guys want to think about too, just to set yourself up for success, because you're going to need to dedicate time to this grow, so you want to make sure that you're able to plan accordingly. You never want to rush any of these processes. You never want to rush, feeding or transplanting or spending time with the plant, or just getting to sit in your grow room and enjoy the plant, getting to look at the plant, making sure it doesn't have any mites, mold, mildew, deficiencies. So keep a calendar. This is going to help you with your seedlings and your cuttings, knowing, who is my faster rooter, who are my better genetics, who had the heavier yield. That'll help you pick out the best phenotypes, and then be able to figure out who do I want to keep and who do I want to get rid of in my garden. Be at harvest ahead of your harvest, so that's going to be very important. There are lots of different things you can do. You can get an app on your phone. They have things like MJ Freeway, BioCheck, THC, and that's ways that you can go online and track your cannabis. There's nothing wrong with a pen and a piece of paper. And that's also something that's going to be really important for yourself as a grower, because you're going to use different nutrients than I do. You're going to live in a different space than I do. So you're going to want to be able to look back and be like, so back in 2010, I was growing these plants in these pots, and I vegged them for this long, and this was my final yield. And now I've changed it up so much, and when I compare them, are they the same? Are they different? Do I want to go back to some of my old styles? So having a calendar is really going to help you. As you can see, I have one, but I just had a piece of paper that I wrote. At the facility I work at, we have a whiteboard where we write down all the tasks for the week. And sometimes I don't always want to transcribe that into writing, so I just take a picture of it, and then I have a file on my computer which is grow notes for the month, so if I ever need it, I can look back. It doesn't have to be in any one way detailed or in any one way kept on record. It's whatever way record keeping makes sense for you and whatever way you're actually going to use it. So the importance of that nutrient schedule, so this is something from Roots Organic, where if you go with a nutrient line, sometimes they'll tell you, with your seedling, your veg, your bloom phase, and your flush, what nutrients you want to add and then what nutrients you want to take away, and that'll do it for you. When we go ahead and we pick out our nutrients, has everyone heard of NPK? Are we familiar a little bit? So that nitrogen, that phosphorus, that potassium. So the nitrogen is great. You're going to want that more during the beginning of the plant's life. We're going to give it that vegetative growth. It's going to keep it in that eternal stage of veg. It's going to make it nice and healthy. Then that phosphorus helps to fuel the roots and the flowering. And then the potassium is going to be very great with helping you out with your development as you start to move along. So can everyone see where my finger's pointing on it? That little decoder, that 300, and then it goes from that 156. That's nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium in that order. And if I had a bottle of nutrients and somebody had ripped it off and all I could read was those three numbers, I would be able to go, this is for the veg and this is for the bloom. It's just about figuring out, how to get all of those macronutrients, those secondary nutrients, those trace nutrients into your feed, just because that's everything the plant's going to need to live. When we're picking out nutrients, just remember that there are synthetic nutrients. We want to stay away from the man-made ones. They're organic, so that's just made out of living material. And then we have the veganic, so that's going to be made without any animal byproducts. So it have no back guano in it. And something to think about, when we're growing in our veg, we want to be preparing for our flower. We want to start to think about things like training, topping, super cropping, fimming, having our mother plants, knowing how long we want to veg them up for. Do I want to let them I've veg mine for 6 months, and in some of the pictures you've seen, they get to be 5-6 feet tall. I also know growers that like to do a lot of low stress training, so they like big bushes. It just depends on which makes the most sense for you and what your spatial restrictions are. So nodes, bud sites, colas. So we just really want to watch out for this as our plant starts to mature. Make sure that it's a female. So I just went through what a female plant looks like. So we have our nodes here. We have our bud sites here. And then as you can see, it starts to turn into that beautiful cola that we all know and love. So picking the proper genetics is definitely going to help set you up for success in this grow room. So that's why I spent so much time talking about that in the beginning about it. If you don't know what you're growing and you don't know if it's more indica, sativa dominant, the way it grows, what it's going to produce, you're kind of setting yourself up for failure in that way because you're not going to be able to provide this plant with optimal conditions. That's really what we want to do. We just want to give this plant the best life possible and figure out how to do it. So we're going to be able to do that by having our veg space with the proper temperature and humidity. We're going to do that by having our flower room, and we're going to do that by taking the time to make sure that we take that month to cure it properly. As you guys can see, there's no wrong way to veg it or grow it. It's just about what makes the most sense for you. So the reason we're taking all this time and putting all this energy into this plant is for the trichomes. It's all about those trichomes. That's that final product. That's that medicine we've been looking for. That has that CBD, that CBG, that CBN, that THC that we've been looking for relief for our patients or to take care of our customers in the recreational market. So all the medicinal qualities of the plant are held within the trichomes. The buds themselves, they're just kind of like a chlorophyll placeholder. The trichomes contain all the cannabinoids, the flavonoids, and the terpenes. So I got a question for you guys. If I have a bud that's like the size of a baseball, but it doesn't have anything shiny on it, no trichomes, and then I have a bud that's like the size of a quarter, but it shines bright like a diamond, which one are you going to take? That one, absolutely, every time, every time. And then, so this is just to show you, this is a beautiful piece of cannabis. And then we're going to look at it under our microscope, and then we're going to see that it's very clear, meaning that our trichomes have not matured yet. And then we're going to see, can you actually see them starting to turn that amber color? And that's when we're going to want to harvest it. But it also depends on, you know, how do you like it? If it's a little bit clearer, it's going to have more of that head high, and then as it starts to become amber, it's going to be more of that sedative. So the cannabinoids in there are actually changing all the time. So really, it's about picking it at the best points for you. Something to think about too is initially when we harvest that plant, there is a point of degradation. Yes, we want to let it cure for a month, but if I had that plant and then I tried to smoke it a year later, do you think the cannabinoid profile would be the same or different? Night and day different. The CBD would have started to degrade and turn into CBN, so you'd find a different chemical compounds within that plant. So that's something you want to think about too. And as you guys start to look at your medicine in the recreational and the medical markets, it'll actually sometimes say best if consumed by, date harvested. They're really starting to get very detailed with their packaging, and I'm loving it. Because those are the questions that I want to know, and those are the things that I wanted to ask. That usually they're like, I have no idea it's harvested, smoke it. And I'm like, oh, it was harvested on this day at this time. I better smoke it. So, if you can believe it, we're already at our 40 minutes, and my name is Ellen Brown, and I'm going to be at booth 301 all day. I'm with CannaGrow, and I'm here to help answer any questions you guys may have. And I also have this picture here. I just took out not even all my cannabis books. These are the cannabis books that I have that I didn't lend out to my friends and never get back. So I've done a lot of reading. I've done so much reading within the last decade, and I think that's really what's going to be the most important thing for everybody to do, is take the time to read, take the time to research the strains. That's really going to be what's going to help to set you up for success, by knowing, you know, do I want to grow hydroponically? Do I want to grow in smart pots? Do I want to grow to have them veg to be this big? Do I want them to be this big? Something else to keep in mind is for our physical restrictions, some of us have a bad back, some of us might not have as much time as we would like to dedicate to our grow. I have a friend who's in a wheelchair, so when we set up a grow for him, he had a tumor and he had it removed, and he'd been a grower his entire life. And him getting that tumor removed was devastating because he was now in a wheelchair and he thought, I'll never grow again. He wasn't necessarily even concerned about walking and that physical therapy. He was like, I can never grow again. How am I going to water my plants? How am I going to take care of my plants? So what we did was we set him up a grow table raised up, and he could actually put his wheelchair under it, and he could have his lights down. And we gave him smaller sized plants. We started to go with those auto flowers. I like to veg him for 6 months. We only veg him for like 1-2 months, so that way it would be low enough and he would be able to take care of it. So it just depends on, you know, who you are, what your restrictions are, but just to, you know, I like to tell that story because it can show you that no matter what your situation is, there is a way to figure out the best way to cultivate for you. I love growing my plants. I think it's very therapeutic. I recommend that everybody do it, or at least give it a try and see if it's for them. I have my email up here, so I'm ellen@promaxgrow.com. And even if you don't have any questions today or tomorrow during this convention, anytime you need any help, like, I'm here to help you. All the other speakers are here to help you. We really want to see you, you know, succeed in your grow room. And I'm going to tell you guys what I tell all of my students. If you ever have any samples you need tested, I'm here for you. All right. Cool, so we got like 5 minutes. Does anybody have any questions for me? Anything you can think of? And if you can't think of anything now, we're right in front where everybody enters, 301, and I'm going to be there for the next 2 days, and I'm more than happy to answer any questions. Cool, thank you guys very, very much. I really appreciate it.